Good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Finance and Audit Committee for the Sacramento Metropolitan Fire District. I hereby call this Finance and Audit Committee meeting to order. We now have the public opportunity to discuss matters of public interest within committee scope, including items on or not on the agenda. Madam Clerk, do we have any cards or anyone online?
I have no speaker cards. And do we have anyone online wishing to speak? No. And no one online wishing to speak.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. We now move to our consent items. Chair will entertain a motion. First and seconded, please call the roll.
Yes. Director Weber?
Aye.
Director Jones?
Aye.
Director Clark? Thank you. Motion passes.
Very good. All righty, guys. Fasten your seatbelts. Here we go. Presentation item number 1. Fiscal year 24-25 Capital Improvement Program Plan. I would like to welcome Administrative Analyst Castleberry to the podium.
Thank you. You took my line. I was going to say buckle up, but you already said it. So now
He can never be emphasized
I
enough.
know.
Go ahead.
So good evening. Tonight I am happy to bring you a overview of our proposed capital improvement plan for fiscal years 24-25 with projections through 28-29. So as you know, the purpose of our CIP is to organize and memorialize our capital needs, to identify those needs and plan for the financing of those needs. This is a coordinated planning effort across planning and development. You guys have seen this before. So we use some of our master planning documents to identify needs. Those needs are turned in, submitted via a project initiation form. They're separated out into our 1-year and 5-year plan. A committee reviews those, ranks those based on district goals and objectives, specifically for the upcoming fiscal year, in addition to our normal strategic goals. And then a financing plan is prepared. That goes to the executive team for review alongside preliminary budget, and then we bring that to the board for recommendation. So a 5-year summary. As you can see, our projected 5-year need is just over 179 million. Our largest need, you can see, is in apparatus and equipment, 73.4 million. New construction projects at 38.1 million. Station remodel and expansion projects at 24.3 million. Facilities repair and replacement projects, 31.3 million. Land acquisition, 2.4 million. Personal protective equipment, 8.2 million, and 522,000 for miscellaneous projects that don't otherwise fit into one of those categories. So for this year, there were 55 projects submitted in total with $104.7 million. 45 of those were new projects and 10 of those were carryover projects. So carryover projects would be projects approved in a previous fiscal year that are still in progress. So we would carry those over to the new fiscal year. When we last visited the CIP at my presentation in March, we had just finished our committee review and I brought you an update on our total request. Since then, we've prepared this financing plan for the proposed projects that we're recommending for fiscal year 24-25. The executive team has reviewed those, like I said, alongside preliminary budget. And those have been incorporated into preliminary budget and are being presented here prior to going to the full board for approval in June. Here's another slide showing the same thing. Board review and approval will be up next. So for 24-25, like I said, we had 55 total projects submitted. That was 45 new plus 10 carryover. We're recommending 28 of those 55 projects move forward for fiscal year 24-25. So of the 104.7 million requested, we are recommending a funding level of 51.7 million. 38.1 is allocated for the carryover projects, and 13.6 is allocated for new projects. So a review of our carryover projects. Like I said, these are projects that were approved in previous fiscal years and are still in progress. So we've got 27.1 million in new construction projects, 8.1 million in apparatus and equipment replacement projects, 2.4 million in land acquisition projects, 259,000 in facilities repair and replacement projects, and 199,000 in miscellaneous projects. That miscellaneous project is a grant-funded project there. The 18 new projects we're recommending, we've got 11.9 million in apparatus and equipment replacement projects. You can see there how that is broken down. 805,000 in personal protective equipment projects. Those are all replacement projects or outfitting our recruit academy. 495,000 for facilities repair and replacement projects. Those are partial funding for over the total request, and 322,000 for miscellaneous projects. In the CIP plan, which was attached to this, I don't know if you got a chance to go through all 150 plus pages of that, but there's specific information in there about every project, a breakdown of a description of the project and what it entails and all that. So if you're looking for that information, you can find that in the plan. So the breakdown of fund sources, Dave will go over this a little more in his preliminary budget presentation, but just sort of a general overview of the 28 total projects. Like I said, 51.7 million is the recommended funding level. You'll see the majority of that is coming out of the capital facilities fund, 19.3 million. And just over 15 million of that is anticipated to be financed over the next 5 years. So that'll be spread out over the 5 years, depending on when we're going to take delivery of those items. So some of the items have a 1-year lead time. Some of those have a 4-year lead time. So it'll sort of be spread out a little depending on when we're actually going to receive those items. 15.5 is coming out of the Development Impact Fees Fund. That's for our capital projects. That's also included in the Special Projects Fund for Zinfandel. 2.6 million is anticipated to come from the general fund, and 199,000, as I stated, is being covered by a grant for one particular project. And then 135,000 will be coming out of the lease properties fund to cover a portion of a project being done here at headquarters. So this leaves 27 projects that are not being recommended for funding next year, resulting in a total unfunded need of 53 million. So you can see the breakdown there, 22.7 million in apparatus and equipment replacement projects, 16.6 million in facilities repair and replacement projects, 12 million in new construction, and 1.7 million in PPE projects. So next steps, like I said, you've received a copy of the plan that was attached to this agenda. You guys can take a look. That'll also be sent out to the full board and be presented to the full board for adoption and approval at your first meeting in June alongside preliminary budget. And that concludes my presentation. I'm happy to take any questions you have about that.
Are there any questions from my fellow board members?
I think it's very well detailed, and I love the graphics. It's easy to understand, you know, from my part, my point of view. So thank you for that.
Right.
Director Webb?
Just clarify for my pea brain, the carryover projects, they're already budgeted for and funded? Yes?
Right. So they are, how carryover projects typically work is they're approved at a certain funding level. As they go, we make adjustments to that. So as you know, we do a preliminary CIP. We revisit that again at final budget, and then we revisit again at mid-year alongside all of our budgets. So as along the way, when there are changes to those projects, They are proposed as part of the budget and adopted as part of the budget. They do go down, actually. So sometimes when they're submitted with a budgeted cost in mind based on what we know. And then when we, actually secure the contract or actually secure the PO, the cost does go down sometimes and we make those adjustments. Mhm.
So Zinfandel would be a good example. That will go down to zero.
Because of our grant funding, correct?
Correct.
Excellent point, Chief. Thank you. Thank you. Yes, and I wanted to say thank you again for the detail in this report, especially delineating all the projects, all the proposals approved, put on the back burner, so to speak. And I really appreciate that delineation for detail. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Anything else?
That's it. That's all I have.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. All right, presentation item number 2, 24-25 preliminary budget. CFO, Mr. O'Toole, welcome to the podium.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just wait for the presentation to come up. Oh, there we go. Yeah, so good evening, Madam Chair, Directors, Fire Chief House, colleagues, no members of the public. Dave O'Toole, Chief Financial Officer. Tonight I'll be presenting the 24-25 preliminary budget. This budget is built on the requests we received from staff as well as updated revenue and expenditure data. And as we always do, the main reference point when I'm doing comparisons tonight will be the most recent budget, which was the mid-year budget. So to jump right in with an agenda, this is what we'll be covering tonight. The overview of the budget, followed by turning to the general fund with the revenues and expenditures, and then a long-term forecast covering the 5 years, 24-25 to 28-29. Quick tie into the CIP program financing, and then following and any questions you may have at the end. So this is probably the simplest overview of the budget, but answers to the main questions that you often get is how big is Metro Fire's budget and how big is the reserve? So Metro Fire's budget in the shorthand is over 300 million. This would be the quickest way to answer that. If you look at the expenditure line there, on the general fund, it's 304.4 million, and all funds, it's 373.8. But let's focus on the general fund column for a moment. So for fiscal year 24-25, revenues are anticipated to be just over 280 million, 280.8. Again, expenditures at 304.4 million. And net transfers, with transfers in, transfers out, the net transfers is positive, is 16.8. So when you take that revenue of 280 and you add the net transfers of 16.8, you're still short of the total expenditures by 6.8 million. And that translates into dipping into general fund reserves by that amount. So let me put that reserve dip into some context. As you know, we've been forecasting for the last couple of years or so that the property tax growth that we saw was not going to continue and that there was going to come down. There would still be growth, but it would not be at the rate we saw in 22-23 when we had 7.8% annual growth, or even this current year, 23-24, when we had 5.7% annual growth. We're looking at over the next 5 years, and then you'll see this in the forecast slide, of around 4% or just under 4%. For example, in 24-25, we anticipate 3.7% property tax growth. So that was anticipated. That shrinkage of the growth was anticipated, and that was going to, with the expenditures what they were anticipated to be, there was going to be a dip into the reserve. And there's some other the final budget, for some perspective, the final budget that was approved last year for this current year, 23-24, had a reserve of 11.8% projected for 24-25. So as you can see, we're projecting 11.3%. So it's about 0.5% lower, roughly $1.5 million. And so why is that proposed? Why would it be $1.5 million lower? Some factors to mention, just to regional economic factors. The persistently high inflation is keeping costs up. The interest rates, which have not stayed where they were. There were supposed to be 6 interest rate cuts this year. We haven't seen one yet. We may see one by the end of the year. That's affecting home sales. So that will, in our forecast, that will affect property tax, the rates. But barring other more negative economic news, the budget still appears to reach its low point in 24-25, and then it will slowly climb out. And again, I'll get into that more in the reserve slide. Also because we recognize prior year fiscal savings in the final. I would just point out that if we're comparing the final projection from last year to next year, to 24, 25, when I present the final in 3 months from now, we may be at 11.8% anyway. 11.8% anyway. We may be on target, but here we are now. We think it's about 11.3. So then to take a moment and just look at the last column to the right, the all funds. So all funds, 322.1 million in revenue, expenditures at 373 million. We do have net transfers in of next 17.4. So change in fund balance is negative 34. And that's made up, of course, the general fund piece, but also the special projects fund. We have about 14 million or so. We want to spend down that special projects fund for the Zinfandel project. We have capital facilities fund being reduced too for projects by about 4.6 million. And then the development impact fees fund, which is for the development of fire stations. We expect to, put that money to work next year too. So that fund is also being reduced. So let's take a look at those funds like I just mentioned. That's the next slide. So preliminary budget overview of all funds. It's a familiar table, I think. So it has the 7 funds across the top and then the totals to the right. And the best way to look at this slide perhaps is those shaded rows would be your, and I've used this metaphor before, the savings account metaphor. The shaded rows are your savings account. That's where you have your reserves. That's where you save for a rainy day, like for your retirement or your kids' college education or whatever. That is the gray line. And then in the unshaded white rows, if you see, that's kind of your monthly transactions, your mortgage and so forth, paying your mortgage or cable bill or whatever it is. In our case, it's what we spend over the course of the fiscal year. And then the bottom row, the bottom shaded is again the savings. It's what's the balance at the end of that fiscal year. So take a specific example. Some numbers we're getting more familiar with would be general fund. So we think at the beginning of the fiscal year that the balance will be, and the general fund will be about 41.5 million. And then there's familiar numbers again, 280 in revenues, 80 million in revenues, and expenditures of 304.4 million. With transfers in of 16.8 again, it leaves us with that negative change in fund balance of 6.8. What that does to the general fund balance is it reduces it by 6.8. You get 34.7 is the projected revenue, the projected balance we expect to have for the general fund at the end of next fiscal year of 24-25. So that's how you use this table. Capital facilities, just kind of little to explain that again. So we start with a $5.5 million in the reserve, if you will, beginning balance for that fund. Expenditures of 25.2 million. You have transfers in from other funds into the capital facilities fund of 20.6 for various projects. Change in fund balance is about 4.6. So we expect to have a balance of about 850,000 at the end of the fiscal year. Leased properties fund, which is a fund we use for, as its name suggests, to take care of the properties that we lease. We have income coming in there. We expect the income to exceed the revenues, but at the end of the year, the ending fund balance will be almost 1.9 million. The next 3 in grants and development impact fees fund and IGT fund. You can see the revenues come in there. Those are all funds that we expect to use and deplete every year. They're not a fund where we would keep funding. If we get grants, we want to spend that money. The development impact fees, we're going to put that to work on projects next year. And then IGT, it gets transferred to the general fund. And then the last one, the special projects fund, same idea. There's a balance in there. We expect to spend it and put it to work on the Zinfandel project. So that's how this slide works. It gives us a snapshot of all the funds together, beginning balances, ending balances, and what's happening in between. So for the next slide, next few slides, I'm going to talk about general fund and starting with the revenue side. So let's see, again, we want to reference that the changes that are being mentioned here are relative to the mid-year budget. This slide is an overview of general fund revenues. Projected general fund revenue, again, it's 280.8. So that's an $8.6 million increase from 23-24 mid-year budget. That includes property taxes, which is about $7.5 million increase over 23-24. This would be the 12th consecutive year of property tax revenue growth and the 14th consecutive year of revenue growth. And a good streak there. It also includes charges for services in the revenue. So that's 65.4 million, which is a $2.8 million increase. That's part of that is EMS medic fees at 49.7 million, which is a $2.3 million increase. And CRD fees are up by 860,000. Offsetting revenues are lower deployment revenues, just anticipating another slower than we'd had seen previous years for deployments, typically for fires, of course, forest fires. And GEMT revenue loss is about 1.6 million, but that is offset in another part of the budget by a reduced cost there. So that was a revenue that we got for administering the GEMT program for other local agencies. We're not doing much of that anymore in 24-25, but we also have lower costs. So that's a bit of a wash. Net IGT funds transferred into 22.8 million, about $177,000 less than 23-24. And I put that on a general fund revenue slide because again, those IGT funds are being just swept right into the general fund. So it's a different fund, but I like to keep it, mention the two together. So let's take a quick detour to IGT, to the IGT programs. So there are two, as we know, the voluntary rate range program. There's a short description on the slide there. It's an intergovernmental transfer program where the district funds are transferred to the state DHCS, who combines it with other local agency funds to pull down federal funds for the reimbursements for transport of the uninsured and Medi-Cal beneficiaries. In 24-25, we expect revenues of 14.8. However, we're going to have to IGT, or intergovernmental transfer, up about 5.8. So the net income is 9 million. And then the Public Provider Ground Emergency Medical Transport Program, or PPGEMT, was established by AB 1705, supports Medi-Cal beneficiaries, replaces the former GEMT program with a much higher Medi-Cal transport reimbursement rate of $947 more than for transport within the previous rate. The revenues are 20 million with an IGT transfer of 6.2 gets you to a net of 13.8. So you add the two bolded numbers, the 13.8 and the 9 million, that's where you get the $22.8 million IGT transfer to the general fund that I've referred to on prior slides. Okay, so moving on from revenues over to expenditures. So projected general fund expenditures are 304.4 million again. That's a 17.2 million or 6% increase over 23-24. A big part of that is the labor budget. That will be 257.8 million. That's a $15.7 million increase or 6.5% over 23-24. Let's see, labor costs will increase as a share of general fund revenues, including net transfers on the IGT fund from 81.7% in 23-24 to 84.9% in 24-25. Services and supplies are at 42.3 million. It's about 850,000 higher than this year, only 2%. So that's a very modest increase in service and supplies, and the divisions and management work closely together to keep service and supplies costs down this year. So those are our summary of major expenditures. I'm sure we want to dig a little deeper. So we've got a slide here on the labor costs. Remember that labor costs is made up of several things, but two broad categories would be compensation and benefits.
Total package.
What's that?
Total package.
The total package. Yes, exactly. And the compensation includes things like wages, incentives, whether that be paramedic incentive or education incentive or longevity. It includes overtime and constant staffing. For suppression staff, includes out of class pays and sick and leave buybacks. Those are all in the compensation line. And then the benefits line includes things like pension pays to CalPERS for pensions. It includes our payment to the Sacramento County employer SCRS, Sacramento County Retirement Fund, and as well as insurance for medical insurance, workers' compensation, dental and vision. So kind of everything else that would be a benefit falls in that side of it. So I'll take the top half of the slide first. Total compensation, it's 143.9 million. That's 9.8 million more than 23-24. Wages will be $8.8 million higher, 11.4%. The largest drivers there in wages would be the expiration of the SAFER grants, which will be expiring partway into this fiscal year. That's going to add about 2.4 million to wages. We're also planning to have 2 firefighter academies this year, which adds about 2.4 million to our wage costs this year, as well as 2 MMP academies, which is another 600,000 or so to our wage costs. So really enhancing the staffing this year, but that's going to drive up our wages. There's also decreased constant staffing, which is the overtime for suppression staff of 428,000. That sounds good, but I would just ask, remind you that the reference point is mid-year. So it is, the number is very close to what was at mid-year. For another reference point would be the final budget, where it was about $5 million lower. So we're really seeing constant staffing stay high. And part of the reason is that we do have the leaves there are more leaves available in the latest contract, and people are using them. There's just more use of vacation, more use of sick. There are workers' comp leaves that are out there, and that's just keeping the constant staffing costs high. So we don't see a reason to lower it as we typically might in prelim or final. We think it's going to stay high at that level. So it's basically very close to where it was at mid-year.
Mr. Tool, I have a quick question on that. Maybe the chief could fill in. With the completion of our 2 academies for this year, do we anticipate this constant staffing requirement to be reduced?
So there will be more staff, of course, and we anticipate building a pool next year of, Ty, is it 19 in the pool or 21? Okay, 21 in the pool. So that is factored in, that will reduce constant staffing.
So we're going to have pools in both the firefighter rank and for the MMPs. And so we'll be able to forecast that a lot better, since this is the first time in many years that we will have a pool. I don't want to say that we don't have a recruitment problem any longer, but we're doing a lot better if we're saying we're having a pool in both areas. So we can navigate that and look at what that constant staffing number does for the first time in a long time.
No, that's good. That could contribute to the projected rise in our reserves over the next 5 years, perhaps. We're looking at ways to bolster that up, right?
If you reduce that constant staffing size, absolutely, yeah.
Thank you for the side question.
Of course. Let's see. Yeah, incentive pays for EMT paramedic education, hazmat, and longevity are $551,000 higher than last year, mainly because of the promotions and wage increases. The new employee behavioral wellness incentive continues, so that is an ongoing cost, about $2.9 million in 24-25. And then shifting to the lower half of the slide, there are benefits. Let's see, increased CalPERS pension contribution. We knew this was coming. It's a $7.5 million increase, about 14%. Anticipate, recall that this is mostly based on market performance from 2 years prior, and they had that awful year at the end of 2022. So anticipate improvement next year, but it is going to be a steep climb this year. Also, we have increased employee medical costs of $1.6 million. The workers' comp costs. So we're actually decreasing that by about $2 million. And that's based on what we're seeing in the most recent trend since we got the new third-party administrator. The costs are actually going down substantially in the 4 months on record that we have for them for this forecast. So, and if for some reason it's insufficient, we do have a workers' comp reserve, which we have not touched, but it is there as well. Last, the benefits portion of the budget does not include funding for a Section 115 trust. You may recall in the mid-year brought forth a set aside for a 115 trust of $1 million. I'm not proposing that we fund that right now, just given the reduction to the general fund that we defer. It continues to be a good idea. I think we all agree, but maybe not until we are kind of out of the stage of where we're dipping into the general fund. Next is general fund expenditures for services and supplies. Again, the total is $42.3 million. This slide has some highlights on there. So we're going to reduce the liability for property and insurance premiums by almost $630,000. There's going to be an increase for fire equipment servicing of $339,000. Dispatch service of $418,000, mainly related to a new contract with the dispatch employees. There's a $606,000 decrease in medical equipment servicing. This is mainly related to the gurneys and power loaders that were purchased in final last year. So we knew there would be reductions on a going forward basis because we made that purchase. It's the first time we can see it. And then a $335,000 decrease in communication equipment supplies due to some replacements that are in the CIP, which allow us to lower this line. Capital outlay. So the total capital outlay spending is $51.1 million, including $25.3 million committed from the Capital Facilities Fund. Some of the major capital outlay projects on the slide there are, of course, the ladder truck replacement, 1.7 million, ambulance replacements, type 1 engines, type 3 engines, and technology storage appliance replacements, which would help with the storage and operation of the PCs, which I know everyone who works in this building is looking forward to. And then major capital outlay facilities projects funded with other funds, the Grant Line 220 acquisition. So that's also in the CIP, of course. We expect to spend 2.4 million from the Development Impact Fees Fund for that. The Vineyard Springs Station build, 10 million from the Development Impact Fees as well for Vineyard, and then Zinfandel, 16.8 million from the Special Projects Fund. This next slide is here's the reserve projection. Sorry, the forecast projection for the general fund. It includes reserves and property tax growth. So it incorporates the latest economic data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the Federal Bureau of Labor Statistics, as well as property tax data from our property tax consultant. We have annual inflation at 2.5% over the 5-year forecast period from 24-25 to 28-29. The cost of borrowing is 4.5% in the budget year, and then declining gradually to 3% by 28-29. PPGMT and VRP, the IGT programs, are part of this revenue picture, of course, as well, because they are transfers in the general fund. We assume a modest growth of about 2% over the 5-year period. Compensation is grown annually at 3%, which would be an estimate that will include natural wage growth for promotions and step increases in that. And that is and approved wage increases. Let's see. So the bar chart at the top there shows that reaching the 15%, which is the green line, is just like your straight 15% there. It would not be possible under this forecast. We get close by the end. I'll read off the numbers to you. So again, for 24-25 reserve, that red line would be at 11.3%. The next year it would climb to 11.4%. And then in 25-26, 12.3%, 26-27, 13.5%. And then last year, 14.7%. That's the red line tracking the reserve share. The blue bars are your ending general fund reserve balances. You can tell as your reserve balances go up, the red line also goes up as well. So your reserve share. Generally, labor costs are the largest part of our budget. That's a well-known, well-established fact. So ensuring that compensation doesn't grow rapidly over this period and a constant staffing doesn't balloon, that kind of thing. And pension cost growth will be those are 3 important factors to determining, to not eroding the general fund reserve, as well as property tax, keeping the property tax growth rate. And so speaking of property tax, at the bottom, the box there that kind of snuck in at the bottom there, that is showing the property tax growth over the 5-year period for each year. For reference, the growth rate in 23-24 again was 5.7%. And you can see the rates at the very bottom there of between 3.7, 3.9, 4, 3.9, and 3.8 again. So staying in that range. So in summary, the main drivers to preserve this forecast or to do better will be primarily property taxes and labor costs. Those will be the 2 big drivers that will shape this forecast. But where we are now today, this looks like the way it's going to be. The CIP program. So we just heard a presentation on that. I'll be brief. So again, at 51.1 million for this year, for 24-25. And 28 projects, 18 new and 10 carryover. The funding components of the financing plan for the Capital Facilities Fund is about 37% of the total, or 19.3 million. Development Impact Fee Fund is about 30% as well, is 30% with 15.5 million. The Special Projects Fund at 14.1 million, 27%. General Fund contributing 2.6 million to the CIP plan of 5%, and then grants and lease properties contributing less than 1%. So that's the makeup tie to this year's budget. So the summary slide. So the district's budget is balanced, but by an anticipated reserve transfer. That's how it is balanced. Reducing the general fund reserve balance by 6.8 million. You had to pull it out to balance the budget. Preliminary budget decreases the forecasted general fund reserve from 13.4% in the mid-year to 11.3%. Revenue growth, including net transfers, is budgeted at 3.5% higher than last year. And expenditure growth is budgeted at 6% higher than the prior year. PPGMT and VRP are important to this scenario. They're adding 22.8 million to the district's budget. And finally, the 5-year forecast shows a reserve borrowing likely and gradual. Property tax growth will lead to a steady increase in general fund reserve, we call it slow and steady, subject to property tax trends and labor cost commitments. With that, I welcome any questions you may have. This is a receive and file item, of course, and it will go to the Board of Directors on June 13th.
Fellow directors, comments or questions? A lot of content here. Director,
You don't have anything?
No.
Oh, okay. First and foremost, thank you so much for all your projections, the wizardry that you do with all of these years. I mean, you seem to be very spot on with that. I also commend the fact that Intercare seems to be doing a very good job for us. 32% decrease in work comp that's a giant number. So the automatics that the chief has been given a resolution to abide by, the fact that we're treating our folks, I think is a direct correlation of those savings, and the fact that, again, we're treating our folks, I think it's bringing that number down. So hats off to you and your folks. It's amazing what can happen when we treat our folks. So thank you.
thank you, Director Weber. No, I would like to thank you for all the projections and a wealth of data here. Now, in one of the slides, it mentioned around 22 million plus for IGT stuff. Is that in hand or is that a projection? It didn't quite settle into my head as we were
Sure,
going
that's a
through.
good question, and it's a tricky one coming up with the right number, because as we've seen, the program is 16 months, 17 months old now, and we still don't have all our funds from that very first month. So making that projection is difficult, but it's based on what we're seeing currently, the amounts we're getting every month, and just assuming that level carries through the projection. There is, I know it begs the question, well, what about all those prior months? And there's about 4 million that that is lagging behind, more what I would call outside of the normal lag. Let me break that down for a moment. For one of the participating plans or health plans, it may be a month or maybe 3 months that they typically pay us. If they're responsible, most of them are getting caught up within 3 months. But there's about 4 million that's outside of that three-month period. And so I'm scratching my head, well, when are we going to get that 4 million? And it's not clear enough for me to say to you, yeah, I'm going to add that 4 million to the budget right now because we're going to get it in 24, 25. We just don't have that certainty. Maybe in a few months we'll have that. Maybe we'll never have it. And if the program ends and there's always a $4 million lag behind, only when the program ends would you finally get caught up with that 4 million. That's kind of the worst case scenario. But it's the short answer to what you're saying is there's about 4 million that I'm just not willing to commit that we're going to get in 24, 25.
Okay, so that 4 million is not in the projections for 25, 26 up through 28, 29?
That is also true. Yeah. Yes.
So it's not when we're looking at the projections, we are not including the IGT array of revenue.
Yes.
Okay,
Mhm.
thank you very much. All right.
started
Chief, you
adjusting-
have some comments?
Yeah, we started adjusting that number at mid-year.
Okay.
Back in mid-year. So unless we're getting money in hand
Right.
and
Well,
spending it, so that lag money, we stopped putting that in the budget as of now until they catch up.
okay,
So we're seeing slight increases.
yeah, that's, I appreciate that very much. I appreciate that, kind of practicality. Thank you. All right, are there any other questions?
Yeah,
Sir,
Chief, but the fact is that we know that money is coming. It's not like it's, the government is.
At some point, yes.
Yeah.
Well-
The treasury's not gonna go broke. It's-
well, bird in hand, worth two in the bush. type
Well,
of thing,
I
so,
know. but-
uh, I don't go to Vegas either, so I'm not gonna bet. I'm not gonna bet.
Right, I mean, we know, they always come through. So,
It's services we provided. There's not really a dispute there.
yeah, exactly. So yeah, sorry.
All right. Are there any other questions for CFO O'Toole
Great
and
report.
or the fire chief from the committee? If not, thank everyone for their participation, presentations, one and all, and this meeting is hereby adjourned. Thank you.
Yeah.